Good afternoon, my name is Alexandra and my topic is water conservation. And now my proposition is if California does not enforce stricter water regulations, California will continue to stay in this drought. Put it this way, no H2O, no life at all. Water is a fundamental factor that cannot be lived without. Water is practically everything that we do every day. Tell me, what is one thing that you don't do that contains water with it? Wait a minute, everything. You go to the restroom, you wash your hands. If there's no water, what's going to flush down that waste? I don't know. H2O is an element that should be valued like money. Money, everybody wants it. Water too. What happens when there's no more water? Then they have no money equivalent. But when individuals don't establish proper water conservation skills, it will lead to an unbeneficial clause down the road. For example, one unbeneficial situation is a drought. To help you understand my proposition of why California should enforce water regulations, is that I have my three main claims. Number one, problems in California irrigation system. Number two, California government needs to enforce more policies. And three, implementing innovations. On average, 50% of our water is collected throughout the months of December through February, due to the fact of rain being more common within the winter season. Although the Water Board has also mentioned that in their articles that 75% of water is retrieved from the melted snow and leftover water that gets placed into reservoirs between the months of March and November. Okay, my first clause is problems in the California irrigation system. In the year 2014, this is when California began to enter to the drought, which was during that year there were less more storms and snowfalls throughout the different regions of California. In other words, different regions of California had different reactions to the drought. For example, I remember 2014 when there wasn't enough water. I remember driving down to Water is a primary asset that is needed for our world and our population to keep moving forward. In California, our state intakes about 20% of water that's only used in our urban civilization, and majority is provided through agriculture, that is 80%. These statistics are provided by the documentary Tapped Out, which emphasizes the struggles and how this large state intakes a lot of water and results of our irrigation system. That has led us to a drought. A drought occurs when a precipitation level becomes very low than an average amount of precipitation that is in a particular area that is accustomed to. Unfortunately, California faces this gradual phenomenon by not conducting proper irrigation systems that will be properly prepared for our state for a severe emergency. For example, in the documentary Tapped Out, it mentioned that in 2010 through 2011, there was a large amount of rain, and that was collected to dams around California. But our government believed that we would not be in another drought due to our last drought was in 2004. So they decided to release all that water. This goes back to my story where I said when I was little and I went to go to the Azusa Canyons and there was a bunch of water. I saw government officials and park rangers laying all the water into the streets. This is an example of why we should properly save that water, because you never know what's going to happen. For example, the Great Depression. They thought everything was good. Look, there was no money into our system. Number two, I'll go to my second claim. California government needs to enforce more policies. Throughout the levels of power from the local and state government is the importance of getting rid of the drought. Governor Jerry Brown started to enact an executive order called the B 3716, which was called for local residents in the cities around to have a strict water policy. For example, that certain cities cannot water between certain days. You can only water Monday through Friday, only between 9 to 6 p.m. If you did water throughout that time, over that time, you would get fined about $500. I will now go to my third claim about implementing innovations. California Nation has been creating new innovations to build up water conservation. Some products have been a huge success all around certain publics of California. According to the Harvard studies, time shower heads that give individual roughly about 6 to 8 minute showers averagely save up to 2.5 per gallons per shower. On average, do you know how much water you waste within 2 minutes? 16 gallons. People who use these time showers heads then end up saving up to $100 during the annual water bill. Next, another product that has been beneficial is the urinal and steam combo, which operates by washing your hands after using the restroom. That the water helps by when you go to the restroom, when you wash your hands, that's the same exact water that you use to flush down the toilet compared to using 2 sets of water. These innovations have become a huge asset and has been supported in certain cities like in San Diego. And has been a great beneficial, but although certain cities believe they do not want to do it because it costs too much money. Last but not least, I will list my 3 claims. Problems in California irrigation system, implementing more policies, and last but not least, implementing innovations to help California to not be in a drought again.
Well, I know the subject is water. I'm not exactly sure that I could pick out what the proposition is. I know generally you're advocating some kind of stricter water regulation, but you need to show us that it would work instead of advocating for it as a policy, because policy claims are not what we're supposed to be doing here. The argument that some kind of stricter regulation would substantially protect us or reduce the drought, that might be a claim that would work for your proposition, but I didn't really get that in your argument. So it sounds to me like there's just a lot of information about the drought situation without making a particular inference. The secondary claims, although they are labeled, none of them are stated as declarative sentences. In fact, a couple of them aren't even sentences, they're just topic areas, so I don't know what inference I should be drawing on those particular points, and that's problematic. The notion that there is some problem with the way the irrigation system works, I think that's probably the one place where there's a rich vein for having a potential argument, because there are plenty of disputes about how the water gets used and whether or not the irrigation system that we have in the state of California for distributing water is effective, whether or not we, not the canals, what do we call those?
Wash.
No.
Reservoir.
Not the reservoir. Aqueducts. Thank you. I knew I was going to get there eventually. Whether or not the aqueducts are releasing water in the proper proportions in the proper places. And there's some suggestions, for instance, that environmental issues have entered into this, and it has less to do with the amount of water and more to do with choices concerning where the water is going to be released and how it's going to be released. I think there's a lot of controversy on that issue that mostly doesn't get explored here. There is a criticism of the water resources people inadequately addressing these kinds of issues, and you kind of have this, it was a little unclear. You started talking about something that was happening in Azusa, and then you came back to it, and I guess you've got an example of somebody acting in a way with the water supplies that you thought was problematic. They're releasing it to run off into Nowheresville. And I could see, believe me, I've seen those kinds of things too, and every time I see that I wonder, well, wait a second, I thought we were in a drought, why are we not holding on to this water? And that seems to be a general criticism, but in terms of information, I think it's underwhelming. What's really confusing to me, though, is the whole second and third point, which are all about conservation techniques that are primarily focused on urban areas, when on the first point you showed that 80% of the water is used for agricultural purposes. So the biggest impact that we're going to have by putting in these timers on shower heads, or putting in restrictions, or requiring toilets that are double as sinks, or sinks that double as toilets, or basically they reuse the water in some way, shape, or form, that's not going to affect the biggest part of the problem, which is primarily agricultural in nature, which is why I thought that that should be the area that you develop your argument in the most. There's a lot of information that's presented that's not really given a source citation. I think that's problematic. There is some factual data about the regulations that Governor Brown put into place. There's some information about these techniques that might potentially save us some water. But none of that information tells us how much water it would save, that it would have a significant impact on drought conditions, and that the problems that you identify in the first point would be mitigated by anything that we do in the second and the third point. So I think that's a little bit of a problem for your presentation. All right, thank you.